Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today. I'm Özge. I'm with Asia Arts Archive, and this is the last talk, the third talk of today. And we have three collectives. The Black Archives from Amsterdam, Keleketla Library from Johannesburg, and Asia Arts Archive from Hong Kong and New Delhi. Maybe just a couple of words about where we are sitting now. We are in Fridskul, as you know, and then this specific space is called Fridskul, the Common Library. This is actually the work of more than 11 collectives coming together over the last couple of months and thinking about what we want to create together. So for us, it was an experimentation of working or creating a collective of collectives, as Rangrupa and also Good School would like to call it. And so we started having these weekly meetings last fall, and we said that we would like to do something. Of course, each of us, we have our displays in different parts of the Fridskul, but we also said we'd like to turn this building, and this was the initial proposal and proposition coming from Rangrupa and the artistic team, to turn this building into a temporary and experimental school. And we wanted to do this together. So this space is a major part of this idea. Al Warsha, one of the collectives from Tunisia, they actually turned all of our brainstormings and all of our thoughts into this design that we are occupying for the moment. And huge thanks to Al Warsha for that. And in one of those conversations, we said that, where do we start? Because, we were not very familiar with each other's work the first time we met each other online, or some of us in Kassel in the fall. So we said, let's start talking about our urgencies. How we started our collectives, how we started our initiatives or organizations. And after that, we said, what are the commonalities, or what are the things that we want to do together? So this is where we started. And for today's conversation, we'll also start with that idea of urgency. How our collectives began and what has changed over time since we started. And everyone is going to introduce themselves, but maybe we can start with you guys. Ra or Melissa, what do you guys think?
But also introducing ourselves, right? We are called Keleketla. Library is a universal term, but Keleketla I want to emphasize. And then it's sonic by nature. By saying the name Keleketla is sonic, it vibrates. So to break this barrier of you guys watching us, I want you guys to also participate in saying the name Keleketla. So it's around storytelling. Just to show, we do it around the fire. You can see the vinyl here. It's a circle of people here, and it explodes from there. We have a water fountain in front of us, a water element, but we're just going to imagine a fire element in there. And then this is the name Keleketla. Those who got good eyes can see it. And then I just want to sort of begin by telling a story. So my name is Malusi Malahlela. I'm the co-artistic director of Keleketla, along with my brother, Rangwatu Hlasani, and the audience will say, Keleketla. And we are here to talk of different collective practices, our institutions, and the audience will say, Keleketla. And then we're going to continue the introductions across the board, and the audience will say, Keleketla. Salute.
Yeah, but also this Keleketla can intervene across the story as it continues. One of the critical importance of us calling ourselves such, having Keleketla that speaks to and is part of storytelling practices, sonic, oral practices, alongside what is universally understood as a place of books, was very important. To disrupt the way in which literacies are understood or misunderstood, to disrupt the way in which knowledge production and its dissemination is understood or misunderstood, particularly in our post-colonial contexts, where the book remains a supreme document where the library is a quiet space governed by the librarian who manages the ability of movements. So it's about us having a problem with books while still producing books. Malosi, can I just show people? So this, for example, is a book that is created after about 4 years of working with young people in the inner city of Johannesburg on also challenging how we understand heritage. So when you go see our space upstairs on the first floor, you'll see that the project that we are sharing with all of you here at Documenta is about a heritage site. So on the one hand, we are thinking about what is heritage, what is history, what are archives, while we are also thinking about land, infrastructures, and the programming that happens within there. In particular, the autonomy that artists have the capacity to practice within problematic lands, haunted lands, traumatic lands, lands that carry the bones of our ancestors who've been buried as part of building such a problematic city such as Johannesburg. So Keleketla, in that sense, is about enabling. The very naming is about enabling invisible stories, muted stories, unheard stories, or even unwelcome stories into the place of the supremacy of the book and challenging such types of knowledge production. So we had to name ourselves that way, in a way in which it encourages call and response. That is a library that participates, a library that knows when to listen, and a library that knows when to speak. Kind of connects beautifully to what Patrick was speaking about. A leader is somebody who cares and does something about it. So the agency thereof was about creating that which doesn't exist for us, really. And by that we mean that we created the library not as librarians, not as governments, but as artists and political actors in our society. That was the agency. And also maybe it's important to also mention that before we formed Keleketla Library in 2008, Malosi and I met at the rap circle, at the rap cipher with other collectives of rappers. And we took the role of not only being rappers, but organizers of those events for a period of about 5 years before we outgrew rap and moved into the place of thinking about land, infrastructures, and knowledge production in the form of an unexpected library. That was the agency. Thank you. I'm going to pass it on to the Black Archives.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Thanks for having us, and it's very wonderful and inspiring to be amongst these collectives that we look up to. My name is Mitchell Esaias. I'm co-founder of the Black Archives, and I'm here with a few other members, Camille, Isabel, and Shivani. Jessica couldn't be here, was not feeling so well. So about the question of urgency and how we came about. We are based in Amsterdam. I was born and bred in Amsterdam as well. Parents are from Suriname. And as some of you may know, the Dutch or the Netherlands is quite a small European country, but it was one of the biggest colonial empires, one of the biggest colonizers. And growing up in Amsterdam, I noticed that, we had to learn a lot about all kinds of parts of history, from something that some people call the Enlightenment, some people call something the Golden Age, the Second World War, from a certain perspective. But we did not learn much to anything about colonial history. So whilst studying, together with a few friends, we found a student collective called New Urban Collective. And it was a collective focused on especially black students, students from the Surinamese, African, and Caribbean diaspora. And what we tried to do was tell the stories that we found were missing in the curricula and in society in general. And we also organized a lot outside of the university campus, so in the neighborhoods, in the community. We did mentoring programs with kids. We did things so people could find jobs and internships. Every now and then a little party, our youth exchange, also very important. And we started in 2011. And in 2015, here's a picture by the way, In 2015, we were approached by a few guys named Chemo and Miguel Helbron. Their father was an anthropologist from Suriname who did a lot of research on colonial history. And one of the things he said is that, history and culture are often being presented as if they are, neutral and objective. It's history because it's in the books. It's history because it's in the museum. And, this is the national history. But he was very critical about that. And he said, history can also be seen as a reconstruction of the past. Unfortunately, he passed away and left behind a huge collection of books, about 2 or 3,000. And his sons left that, had that as an inheritance. So they shared that with us. And we had the opportunity to use a small little place in Amsterdam North, put some cheap shelves at IKEA, put the books in there, and we called it our library. We were able to use that for a few months, but because of gentrification, we had to leave that building. So when we were looking for a different place, we ended up here. And this building, where we are located now, is owned by the oldest association of Surinamese people in the Netherlands. It was set up in 1919. By the way, does everybody know where Suriname is? Who doesn't know? Yeah? Okay. No worries, here to learn. Suriname is north of Brazil, on the coast of South America, next to British Guyana, former British Guyana, and French Guyana. So we ended up in that building of this association, and they had a huge collection as well, but it was not really organized. So we made a deal in which we said, hey, we can help you organize it, if we can use the books as well, win-win situation. And when we started opening up the boxes, we found out that there was amazing, fascinating, hidden history, like histories of resistance, people organizing, people who had organized their own messiah in the 1960s and 70s. And I'm just going to show one example. This is a book by Anton de Kom. Who's heard of Anton de Kom before? Nobody? Okay. Well, he was a few people, of course. Born in Suriname, 1893, first generation born after slavery. And he moved to the Netherlands, came in touch with Indonesian nationalists, which inspired him to go back to Suriname to help organize and mobilize the people. But he was seen as a threat to the colonial order, so he was deported back to the Netherlands. And when the Dutch were occupied by the Nazis, he could have decided to just, let them do their own thing. But he decided to join the resistance against the Nazis, despite the fact that he was deported by the Netherlands, and unfortunately died in a concentration camp, Neuengamme. And so this is one example of a very heroic story that we found out about partly in the archive, and that's what we show upstairs as well. So to close it, what we try to do is make these hidden histories, these silent histories, more accessible, more visible, because not everybody has the time and capacity to go through all those books, through art, through exhibitions, through events, lectures, tours, and all kinds of events. So we're very happy to be here and share space and knowledge with you all.
Hello everyone, I'm Susanna Chong. I'm from Asia Art Archive. Together with me we have Oscar and Samira and many other colleagues sitting at the audience. Asia Art Archive was born in year 2000, so this is our 22 years old. It's a young adult. We are founded in Hong Kong, but we have researchers who are focused in different regions in Asia. We are a library, an archive with a physical space as well as a digital platform. We see it's really important since the beginning that we are not just a static collection. We see the importance to have programs and activation. I think this is something that we connect very closely with Keleketla as well as the Black Archive. Talking about the urgency at the beginning, so in fact we start in year 2000, at the same year as Rome Gupta. So think about that time in Asia. In fact, a lot of independent projects happening at that time. There's really a great urgency to document and make this history available for the global, for everyone. So our goal since the beginning till now is really to provide a more generous art history to complicate the way that art history is being told in the world. So of course, the urgency keep changing in terms of collecting. So at the beginning, we are also exploring how. So we have regional researchers in different parts of the Asia region to collect material. Around 10 years, so that is 2010, internet is really booming like that. Many artists have started to have their own website, gallery have their own website. So that's why our research strategy changed. So we locate important time period and important personal archive, which help us to know more about the ecology of different regions, about the modern and contemporary art history development. And very recent years, we care about the important themes that we no longer only seeing regional as independence, like say China, India separately, but we look at it, how can it be looked together? For example, we care key themes like women in art histories, like how artists travel, and also how the art pedagogy and art school influencing the development of art history, like exhibition histories, so I think, etc., and performance art, as well as different topics which we think is really important to help us to understand more about the art history in the region. So we keep evolving, but one thing that we didn't change is that we keep programming, because as we are doing project around contemporary art, we see it's important to have this discourse continue through different platform, through different form, like including the exhibition that we have in the first floor, as well as talks, educational programs, etc.
Hi everyone, I'm Samira Bose. I'm a programs coordinator at Asia Art Archive, but I'm not based in Hong Kong. I'm based in New Delhi, where we also have a small office.
My name is Shivani. I'm the business manager of the Black Archives, and I'm really happy to be here.
My name is Isabel. I'm a researcher. Also do some other stuff at the Black Archives. I think Camille.
Hi, I'm Camille, and I do the production and run the exposition and a lot of the tours at the Black Archives.
Yeah, thank you. It is really great to hear about everybody's agencies, and we are curious to hear Black Archives, Asia Art Archive, and us maybe speaking about how the definition and manifestation of community has evolved over the lifespan of your work or your entity.
Okay, then I'll start, since this one is working. Well, the whole idea and practice of community really evolved over time for us. I think we're the youngest collective of the three sitting here. But as I said, we started as a student collective, or a student-based collective, because we also had always other people involved. And now we kind of shifted to, formally we are a foundation, but we're an archive, but we're also involved in education, activism, and research and art, obviously. So yeah, it's hard to kind of box us into or put a certain label onto us. But I think that, in terms of community, we really see it as a practice. As students, we had a lot of time. Back then, you got a student grant, and then there was a lot of flexibility to do a lot of things besides your studies. So we had quite a lot of time to organize events, to set up the archive, to be engaged in the community. We did a mentoring program every Saturday. However, we did see that as we graduated, we became more older. We live in a capitalistic society. You have to pay your rent, you have to eat. So as we evolve as people, our sense of community and the organization evolved as well. And I have to be honest that it's still a challenge. Camille says a struggle to, find the balance between, our community work. Because what has been essential for us from the beginning is that we found that our work has to be important, of value to the community. And when I speak of community, primarily, we talked about black communities in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. That consists of Surinamese, Caribbean people, African diaspora, and Surinamese is also very broad, with different ethnicities. However, as I said, one of the challenges that we face is that you have to be able to sustain yourself both as individuals within the collective and the organization itself. So currently, our main focus is on developing the archive through art, tours, and educational activities. And the challenge is to continue to focus on creating a social impact, but it also means that you, quote unquote, have to professionalize yourself. For example, when you get funding from a local government or a fund, it comes with certain requirements, but how do you remain true to your values, to your vision? So this is a very important aspect, I think, of how we evolved as an organization. And another aspect, I think, is that, we really learned by doing. We started as a student collective. Now we have an archive, but we were never trained as so-called professional archivists. Camille here is one of the key people in sustaining the archive and doing tours. But it's really something that we learned by doing out of the urgency because of, society and educational institutions not doing it. So we decided to do it ourselves. So currently we have a core group of 4-5 part-time paid people. And besides that, we work with freelancers and volunteers. And the challenge is to keep that community spirit alive, the focus on social impact, the focus on contributing to social change instead of people coming in only for, a job or a certain, a career opportunity. So that is a challenge for us, and it's maybe a question to you because I wonder how you deal with that challenge. I know that it's something that a lot of you face as well.
Okay, I'll try with this microphone. Mitchell, what we were saying about the impact, I think it's something that's been in our mind since the very beginning. Because we all talked about how we've been aiming to think about what has been, what are the histories that are perhaps more neglected or more invisible or lesser visible. And these are the type of stories that we are all interested in. I think that's the intersection of these three collectives that we are talking about today. And I think thinking about the impact, we can also formulate that as almost like an advocacy work. Perhaps, some of us might be more interested in social movements, political movements, maybe art history. But at the end of the day, it's really about the work of advocacy when it comes to working on these stories and making these stories more visible so that more people can join us, more communities can join us, and then we can multiply these stories. And I think it's also something that we have in common. And when it comes to community, maybe one thing that I can say is that we keep learning from artists as well. We are very honored to have, for instance, Salima Hashmi with us today, who is one of the most incredible artists that we've been learning from, and we have her personal archive on our website. You can just go to the website and access these materials. And for instance, what we learned, one of the things that we learned from you is how artists can go beyond just individual creators or individual people. which is a main question that Ruan Gruppe has been asking for Documenta 15 as well. So the artists that we would like to work with and highlight the work of, they would be wearing so many different hats. They would be curators, they would be organizers, they would be writers, they would be educators, they would institute schools. So when you look at their archives, and again speaking from the archival perspective, you would not only see the evolution of a single artist practice, but you would really see the development of a larger cultural scene. And on top of that, maybe the second point that I can make is that these are not only communities that are located in one city. And for us as Asia Arts Archive team, it's very important to think about how different artistic and cultural communities across Asia, how they speak to each other, how they learn from each other, how they make exchanges. For instance, in our display on the first floor of the Fridskul, one of the collectives that we are highlighting, these are the it's a network of performance art festivals that started in East Asia and Southeast Asia in the 1990s. And we really see why the artists had the urgency to self-organize and to create these performance art festivals in different cities in this region and to travel so that they wouldn't only do things in their own most immediate community, but they would keep exchanging ideas, they would keep exchanging practices, and themselves, they would be building this network, they would be building these platforms. So again, these are some of the things that we've been learning about how to think about not only the most immediate communities that we are, let's say, situated in, but also how to make these connections. But maybe Susanna and Samira would like to add something to that.
What Oscar shared is really the formation of our collection. But at the same time, we also think about our immediate context. So we are situated in Hong Kong, so the main library and main space. Our immediate audience since the beginning is people like the art community. Like 20 years ago, Hong Kong really doesn't have much contemporary art space and organization. 20 years after, it's very different. We just have a new, biggest, in a very big contemporary art museum is situated here. But now we are talking about 20 years ago. So at that time, AA really served as a site to connect. Whenever there is artists, there are curators, there are scholars who are in the area of contemporary art travel to Hong Kong. So we're a site to connect people from Hong Kong and other practitioners with this global, international, especially the regional practitioners. I joined AA in year 2005, so this is my 17th years at the organization. I grew up in Hong Kong, so I study in Hong Kong. So when I have chance to really experience more, I study art history, but most of the material that I learn is very much Western focused. I think it's similar to many of you here. But the 2 or 3 years when I start working with AAA, I have this experience, close contact with the material from the region. Then I just start to ask, what if we provide this resource to school, to teachers and students in university and in secondary level? So that is the beginning that we start to explore beyond the art community. How can we contribute to the education field? So at the beginning, we do a lot of youth program, especially senior, secondary, and the university. But in the recent years, we really focus our audience group to teachers because we see the importance that if once you cultivate the teachers, they can expand the influence to bigger audience. So the secondary teachers is really something that a group that we really connect with. The key is we don't not only do it by ourselves, it's over time, we cultivate a group of core teachers, so they almost act as our ambassadors, so we co-doing things together. So in programs, they help facilitate, but we do online resources, they help produce. So we don't do teaching packs, but we do sharing sessions. So these are all people who really teaching on the ground. But what we have is we have a team of researchers who have knowledge in art. So how can they collaborate together with artists? Because artists is the one who really make art, who have because teachers at the end still need to teach hands-on experience. So basically we are drawing a triangle. How can we link the researchers, the teachers as well as the artists together. So I think this is a community which we are expanding. In terms of educators, we have been putting a lot of effort in teachers, but very recently we also put a lot of effort in artists, educators in the region, which not in this way we connect beyond Hong Kong, so with other Asia region as well.
As for Keleketla, in terms of like how communities evolved over time, like Ruang Grupa, like Black Archives and so many, we start as students. So to exploring different sort of, again, as young kids, we have enough time and energy, and then this thought processes that we need to sort of realize in our heads. So when we met, as Ra said earlier, we were living in a like 30 old 5-star hotel when it was during the apartheid regime, but then it was turned into a student accommodation. So 30 floors, 31 rooms. So you can imagine a number of students in there, and each room will have like 4 or 5 students in them. 19 rooms on each floor, yes. So then for us, when we started this sort of hip-hop sessions, because hip-hop has dimensions to it, there's graffiti, there's creative writing when you write your lyrics, there's dance, movement of bodies, and so forth. And then one of the criticality that connected me to Ra when we founded Keleketla was one of his lines that he used. These are the hands of a working man. And meaning you do things by the hands that you have. These are the resources. You begin with self and you expand from there. So it started from that sort of conversation. And when we started our sessions, when we started hosting and organizing these sessions, and I need to stand a bit because as organizers, we lift things up and down the stairs. I have lower back problems a bit. So if I could stand, if you guys don't mind, yeah? Because the chairs don't have, I can't lean on this. So, I mean, when we started our sessions in our rooms, and you can imagine the number of students that we have to engage. So we did a lot of silk screening, and this is before social media, by the way. So when we engaged with the students, we printed a lot of black and white flyers, which was very interesting because it allowed us to build that community. So we'll knock on each room, 19 rooms, 31 floors. So we'll knock on each room. If there's nobody, of course, you'll slide the flyer down the door, and then if there's people there, you engage them. Okay, we're having a session on the 13th floor. Can everybody come through? We nearly got kicked out of the floor because then it'll be super packed. It's not necessarily a big room, so it'll be full all the way to the kitchen and the corridors. But this inspired a lot of engagement and sort of criticality and conversation. So people will be looking forward to the next sessions. It will inspire them to write new lyrics, it will inspire them to create new sort of films and so forth. And then one of the criticality also I need to highlight is how we introduced our film program. Ra was at the time at the University of Johannesburg, yeah? And that was the only way we could access a projector, so we started showing films in these sessions. So that in itself exploded to when we moved out of that building because of the density and the small sort of scale of how we were working. And then, I don't know, through the slides this is gonna come, the building that I speak of was not far from the site that we're trying to, the land basically that we're trying to claim from the city of Johannesburg. Is a heritage site built in 1904. So from our rooms, from the balcony, we could see it from there. So then when we expanded the idea of community from a student accommodation and to moving into the draw hall, which presented us to the larger narrative of Johannesburg in totality, then it was a matter of how we get to engage and sort of proceed from there. And then we began the library. The concept of the library came because of the main library in Johannesburg was going under construction. Yes, this is the site that we speak of. And that's the building over there in the background, as you guys can see. It's tall there. Okay, it shifted quick. But that's where we used to do the programs. As you guys can see, the height of the building, so we could see the draw hall constantly. And then when it was renovated in 2004, because it burned down twice, the second fire was very critical. A couple of people died in the site, so the city decided to spend monies because of the sort of pushback that they were getting from the people. So they spent 10 million to renovate the site in 2004 without the political will to necessarily put landlord in there, meaning we as a small collective, when we got to occupy the site, we had to handle the water, electricity bills and so forth and so forth. And we were a small cultural institution, so the money that we raised for programming, it also forced us to take care of the site in many ways. So from that small community to a larger community introduced us to the inner city as a whole, and the inner city is a Pan-African space, meaning you find all brothers and sisters from Africa there, and it's rich in culture, and then it's sort of also exploded as one of those in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. Ra will expand from this. This is the first xenophobic attacks in South Africa, 2008 in Johannesburg. And you can imagine when we started the library, we had a mobile library that we pushed around the neighborhood, the inner city, to engage people that, okay, a library is starting in this draw hall, this heritage site. The kids can come and participate, the students can come and see, but it was a library of books of the world. But at the same time, we were thinking, how do we create our own library? That's why we emphasize the idea of printing. These are records, and this is one of the maps that is enlarged on the first floor in our space. Yes. So the idea of, through our programs, how do we emphasize the idea of creating our own language and our own voice? So as we started Keleketla, we're starting it in the sense of we want to be an institution. We don't want to be a collective. We started as a collective. It's difficult to start a collective or to operate or make decisions within a collective. And then as you guys can know, as I was talking, Gaze is laughing because it's the same conversation that we had. Decisions need to be made quicker. We need to know, strategize quicker how to move, how to engage, how to bring people in. So we can't go sit around a long table and it takes hours and hours. So for us, the agency also within building these communities is how do we move quicker? Even when we formalized ourselves as an institution, we reduced our board of directors to us, me and him, and one person because of the Section 21 registration that we have in South Africa. So that allowed us again, not to sit with a lot of board of directors, but to be able to make decisions in quite a fast pace. But then having moved at the Draw Hall Heritage site allowed us to engage with other formal institutions. Your Wits University, we're talking about the University of Johannesburg and many other. Even the sort of the informal, formal schools that are popping up in the inner city allowed us sort of to engage them within our curriculum. I'll let Ra expand from there because I need to sit, yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I'm glad that you actually went back to the student collective formative years. And I think it really is becoming quite an exciting thing that we also getting to understand via this lumbung. You know what I mean? Before I didn't know about the wrong group starting as students. And now we just learned about the Black Archives. And a few years ago, I learned that Krata and Vetido in Mexico also studied as students. And there is something there, of course, that I think we all understand about the sort of like the raw energy of being a student. I mean, recently, Peace Must Fall in South Africa was a student-led movement, right? But also the 1976, when the young people challenged the inferior form of education. I mean, it's known as them challenging Afrikaans, this dominant language, oppressors' language, or a language actually appropriated by the oppressors. So there is something there around thinking about youth and maybe been connecting to what Graziel was saying about babies, the babies as people with capacities, right? And how to nurture that. So the Keleketla after school program, this book that I was talking about was really, about building communities of youth, right? And also doing the utmost in our programming to develop critical thinkers who will take on the program. The person you see lying on the floor, right in the middle there, who's a dancer, her name is Emara Mashala. In around 2012, after 4 years of participating in Keleketla after school program, mainly in dance, came to us and asked us if, because we had multiple programs in various disciplines, music, dance, creative writing, and she was, after doing all these other disciplines, had now really became the central key figure in the dance program. So she came to us and said, the work that we are doing here is so important, and there's a lot of issues that are coming out in the work that we create. Difficult, critical issues affecting young people in Johannesburg. How about we, all the members of different disciplines, come together on Wednesdays not to dance, not to do art, but just to talk about these issues that are emerging. We found that powerful. And this was 4 years after sort of the initial defining of, as we were saying earlier, a library that listens and a library that responds, right? So here was a moment that was coming back at us that was really inspiring. We were like, but you don't even have to ask, just do it. There are many rooms in this building where you can find yourself that peace. And this, they called it Teen Talk, just a space for the teens to talk. A few months down the line, an institution called MSF, who have also heard about the facilitation program that we do with the arts, right? So here again, it's like a community that keeps on expanding through word of mouth, through what people hear, comes to us because they had an exhibition on migration at the Constitution Hill. The Constitution Hill is a few blocks away from the drill hall. This exhibition, they were concerned that it needs a public program that speaks particularly to young people. And they asked us to facilitate the workshops, to engage the thematics of this. MSF in South Africa, they focus on access for healthcare for immigrants, particularly those who may not have papers and therefore may feel violated and vulnerable to go to our own government and public health spaces. They could be victimized. So that's their focus. And now we're like, how about then we go to this group, Teen Talk, that is now understood that dialogue is emerging out of this art, questions are emerging that they want to address, to think about how they themselves could actually be the facilitators of these workshops at MSF's exhibition. They were thrilled. And from there, they came up with a program in which for a series of 3 consecutive Sundays, schools from the inner city as well as further away from the inner city were invited to the really, really engrossing, important discussion. This is it here. One of the Saturdays there, that's Emara Machala and Trish Sivanda as co-presenters of this wonderful space, almost like this. So they'll walk in the exhibition, all the invited students from different schools will walk into the exhibition and end up in a space like this where they discuss the problems and the issues that they've engaged in that exhibition. Of course, their manner of facilitation, the way in which they incorporated music and dance throughout those discussions was all rooted in what they have learned from the program. So it was incredible to see how a community develops and evolves from there. For us, that was really a circle, a full circle that was returning and also showing the agency that comes from, not only wanting to be one thing, thinking about cultural work as something that makes us be multiple beings. I'm not only an artist, I'm something else. So when we started rapping, we also immediately took on the role of organizing. At that time, we started this rap, Malusi and I have been collaborating basically for 19 years. So when we met in 2003, it was the 2 of us organizing these rap circles, and immediately other people started joining, people doing film, but also people doing science. And it's also critical to understand that when we started those rap ciphers, we immediately saw them as parallel curriculum to what we were learning in our own schools. And a lot of time actually alienating subject matter and even alienating processes, right, and methods. So those ciphers were our parallel curriculum that we were creating for our own self with weekly cycles. And it was 2 of us, and then 2 years later, we were joined by 2 other members who later left. One cited self-care, the other one was just not understanding the vision. But when we formed Keleketla in 2008, it was 2 of us again, and then a year later, we were joined by about 9 others, and we became this sort of monstrous collective that doesn't really reach decisions, or at least where it does, they are not understood. But at the same time, we're becoming big in a sense that the after-school program was bringing quite a lot of difficult ethical challenges to us, because now we're caring for the children of other people with a lot of emotional traumas, but also of rapture and really beautiful things, which is why it was important for us to create this book, because our neighborhood that we're talking about is defined by the city departments as complex, it's difficult. So it's at the center of migration, essentially. All the trains, all the buses from Southern Africa and even further arrive there. And therefore it's noisy, for one, it's not even conducive for quietness, which is why we are the type of library that we are. But also it's generally neglected. So it's not a surprise that this building itself was neglected. So with this neglect and a building that is beginning this deterioration, it was also difficult to manage a collective where the visions are not understood. So the biggest challenge is when some of the collective members couldn't really understand the ethical responsibilities that was carrying for taking care of children in a space, you know. So we had to, you know, think about how to both be artists, but also be, you know, managers of other people, managers of a building, you know, and slowly the other members started falling away within this collective. But what we've also understood then was that actually the last thing we want to be is employers. The last thing we want to be is a huge organization that, you know, is responsible for people's lives and healthcare and all of those things. What we want to do is to be a conduit for all kinds of things to take place. So we understood quickly that because we like serial projects, we have like Scaftin is a serial project, it's now number 4 and 5 with Documenta, and it brings other people in as a project. That happens when it can happen, the conditions allow. Tatikava Orchestra, this is volume 5, is another collective project. In this one, collaborated with young musicians from Johannesburg and our elder from Zimbabwe living in Germany, Buya Stella Shiwesh. And it was released and performed at the Berlin Biennale Volume 10. And then this one, another intergenerational project, Keleketla. It was in collaboration with Ninja Tune co-founders, Code Cut, but also involving a whole lot of people from different countries and different cities. And there are many other projects that work like that. So in a sense, we are an umbrella for short-term, recurring, serial collectives. And that's how the evolution of our community is. So you can also see how very local we are, from placing flyers under people's doors in just one building to thinking globally and across borders in our collaboration. I mean, not to mention another roadmap as another forging of a community that has been ongoing for years. And those are the type of serial and recurring projects that expands how we understand community for ourselves. Any more thoughts on community? I'm sure we can go on forever.
Yeah. I think we can talk about this for hours, and I heard a lot that, you know, resonates. I heard a lot which resonates with our story, but this mic is not really resonating. And yeah, what you can really see, learn, and feel from all of the stories is how the organizations evolve. You know, how collectives are always dynamic due to internal issues, external issues, and, you know, that as collectives you have to make decisions on how to move forward. So this is my question, or our question. Given your evolution until now, it's very interesting to see the similarities but also differences. You, as Keleketla, mentioned that you want to focus more on serial projects. You don't want to be an employer. Whilst Asian Art Archive, if I understood correctly, it's a little bit more formalized with, you know, I believe 70 people. Sorry, what? 40?
40.
Wow, 40. 40 people. That's a lot. And we're kind of in between. So I wonder what your future plans or ambitions are in terms of evolving further in achieving your, mission and goals and social impact.
Mitchell, I think you made a really interesting point because, for instance, Asia Art Archive doesn't identify as a collective. I think we can we can admit that. Yeah, but we do definitely share the values that we've been all speaking about. The values about generosity, for instance. So, sometimes these words are quite abstract, but for me, one of the most amazing things in this process was to really learn how you guys practice these things in your work, in your collectives. For us, for instance, perhaps there are two ways that we are approaching that value. The first one is the idea that the library and the archive, we try to open these resources as much as possible. So especially when it comes to the archival materials, most of them you can reach on the website. We don't buy archives, we don't own archives, but we try to play the role of the facilitator or the mediator. So if there are copyrights, artists would still hold the copyrights. If there are Creative Commons, then it's a little bit more open way of sharing these materials. But our whole ethos, I would say, would be really about how can we make these resources as accessible as possible, benefiting as many people as possible. Even if you cannot come to Hong Kong, you still have access to these resources, for instance. So that would be one way of thinking about generosity and going to how we share these values. And the second one would be the way that we are actively engaging artists, researchers, scholars, curators, and cultural producers to think with us. We are not necessarily in the position of experts who would define what is important to archive, what is important or what is most urgent to document. But we work with a community of people to think about how to build this archive as well as the library, how to build the collections overall, and also how we can read these materials, how we can interpret these materials, how we can multiply the stories, and how we can invite more artists to not only to come and to do, let's say, an interpretation, but also speculate using these materials. So these are the main values that we've been thinking about and we've been developing, we've been trying to articulate even better over time. Maybe one thing that I can mention is that, moving forward, going back to your question, Mitchell, as we were discussing and brainstorming with the other 11 collectives about how to build the space so that the whole building can better function as this temporary school, we were also renovating our library in Hong Kong. And that was, we've been very much influenced from this process as well, because how do we want to think about the library as a social space as well? And maybe, Susanna, you can say a couple of words about how we are really thinking about all the spaces that we are creating as social spaces and not this static archive or isolated archive that you were also talking about in the beginning.
As you see some of the pictures, you should see a more traditional library, basically shelves of books, which is where we are situated and how we form in terms of in the architectural way. We are in the process of renovating the library. So basically in the middle of the space, now instead of the bookshelf, we create a social space, which even researchers who come to work can also, there are tables, they can work together, but the bookshelves will be at the side, and there is also quiet reading area. But when there is programs happening, the reading room area will turn into basically a event space. I think this is not new, but we just match the physical space with what we are doing. So as I said at the beginning, we see the importance to have discursive program parallel to collecting. So I think the new space just reflects who we are in a better way. So at the same time, as I mentioned, now it's very different from 20 years ago. So we also have huge organization in Hong Kong, a big museum, a medium-sized contemporary art center. But we are also thinking about what role could we play. So we really want us to be a site to bring people together, especially people who are really working on the ground in Hong Kong or in the region, to really see us as a site of gathering, as a site of meeting, as a site of working together. So I think although we have 40 people, but we think this is the size we would like to freeze in, because we think this is good enough, because although we have 40 people, but we do a lot of things. We have programs team, we have a team of researchers, we have librarian who help to handle the collection, as well as administration, communication, etc. So this is a team help us continue to work, but at the same time, we think it's good not to expand further in terms of human resources. We would like to see how can we work together in this size. But we think that how can we continue to be alternative and independent space, which we can play our role. I think we keep reflecting how can we be when time goes. Like 20 years ago, we may be the only one or two independent contemporary art organization in Hong Kong, but now there are more happening. So I think we are interested to bring all different voices together in this discursive and in working together way.
Future plans, perspective when it comes to community, archives, and storytelling. I mean, our future right now is the fight for this site, the land that it sits on. It was built by the British for, one of the reasons also was for the gold rush in Johannesburg, so to protect the gold rush, So its architectural standpoint doesn't fit the sort of contemporary and future idea of where we want to be, how we want to take it, and how we want to use that land. So again, going back to that expansion of communities, we sort of have been in this back and forth fight. It's been like 12, 13 years now with the city of Johannesburg and the authorities responsible for that land, in turning it into something more beneficial for the future of that neighborhood. During the 2010 World Cup, for example, there was a lot of development in Johannesburg specifically for the World Cup, but the inner city was never touched in either way. And then also post-94, the Johannesburg inner city is still an apartheid sort of built city. Spatiality is still an issue. Spatial justice and mobility, how people move, is still an issue. So for us to introduce so opposite this space is the first multi-complex cinema in Johannesburg. You can see the oval gray sort of facade of the building. So these two city block buildings, we want to turn them into something of right now, we sort of engage in this conversation with Herzog and de Mura, the architecture firm in Basel. And then they are not coming there with their own ideas. Of course, they're coming through our own intentions of how we want to sort of create a design that will fit into this programming, this complicated, complex programming Ra was speaking about, my partner was speaking about. So how do we also save these two city land buildings to benefit the inner city? So basically what we're doing now, we moved out of the building in an ethical exile, what we call an exile, to another building that we found 4-floor buildings. We have a rooftop bar session and so forth. But then that building, we want to turn it into something that is beautiful for the neighborhood itself. Like you said, it's a Pan-African space. It's complex, it's dense to the maximum. And we want to save the kids there. For example, I spoke of the 2010 World Cup. The increase in that neighborhood doubled in ways that is unimaginable. And there was a lot of children being kidnapped and so forth and so forth. So what we did with in one of our programs, we created a safe city map in collaboration with the kids in the inner city. They will point certain spaces where they feel safe. And then this is a pocket-sized map. So all of them will have it as they move around the inner city. So wherever they feel threatened, they'll move to the spaces that they feel safe. And then one of the worst things that we felt is that the same building that we created this workshop in, it was a safe space, but technically not a safe space. So for us, we're trying to create that land for these kids. We were trying to create a safe zone for these kids. When we moved out in 2015, we had to tell every single kid, it was like 100 or so children in the inner city. So every time they returned books that they borrowed, we'll sit with them and tell them that the library is going to close, we're going to move out. And this also goes to burnout, mental capacity and so forth, what we carry on our shoulders. So that energy that we never spoke of when we moved out is the energy now in our new space. We concentrated it to a degree that we're exploring ways of saving that land, of owning that land. We want a 99-year lease. Also, the idea of governance also is required. Such spaces in the inner city, heritage sites like this, are collapsing Also, the Johannesburg Art Gallery, for those who know, is leaking. So the artworks are still, the city is still trying to shovel where to put all these artworks. So every heritage or cultural infrastructure is depleting and decaying at a degree that is unimaginable. For us, is to save that land, own that land, manage it, and also create funding and responsibility around it. You can imagine that is a 100 million sort of rands or so kind of project. So for us to put it together, we have to, using documenta, of course. Documenta, I mean, this fight has been going on for 13 years, as you said. Documenta gave us a moment to pause and rethink, and also create, give us the power capacity to invite the City of Johannesburg mayor. She was elected, the first female mayor of Johannesburg. She was elected in December, so it's been 6 months in her position, and it's a lot of work that is sitting on her shoulders. And then we're trying to invite her here to bring and dislocate our officials outside of the political corruption office that they sit in, and give them a new imagination. Of course, using the Fridskul as an example, and documenta itself as a cultural sort of program that is running for 5 years, as an example for us to create a new imagination within our own authority. So our future right now is to play with these sort of power structures and see how we move forward from there. And also one of the strategies that we're thinking is how we turn those two heritage monuments into a World Heritage listing under UNESCO. But it itself comes with its own challenges, again, playing with power dynamics. So right now we're trying to pause a bit on programs. Of course, we're doing a lot of things in our own space, but then right now we're trying to play with these power structures to see how we save that land. And then again, going back to the architectural design of the inner city was never changed for years up until now. So we'll be the first in understanding also how do we bring a new imagination through architectural design that is emphasized by the locale, which is our program. I think that should be it, B.
Thank you. Yeah, very inspiring plans and stories. So, yeah, as I said, we evolved over the past decade, and we're currently in the process of, developing plans for the future as well. One of the, important ambitions for us as a collective is that we are based in one of the few black-owned buildings with a collective purpose in Amsterdam. It's owned by the Association of Surinamese People. And what you see in the Dutch context often is that, it's a social democracy in paper, but a lot of funding for art and social issues goes through government funding and subsidies. So historically, you saw that in the 70s, 80s, there was a political climate that there was space for, people with migrant backgrounds, Surinamese communities, Caribbean communities, etc., to do their thing, often funded by the government. However, when a new political wave came, a more right-wing wave, the funding was taken away, and a lot of these organizations collapsed. But this association was one of the few who invested their resources into land in a building, which is the reason why we are able to exist. So one of our, I think, more important issues is to develop a strategy that we are not too dependent on government subsidy, can remain true to our, values, with our goals of, making a social impact, whilst sustaining what our former, our ancestors, you could say, the former generation left behind. And so this building, we want to develop it into a meaningful cultural and community center with space for, the archive, space for exhibitions, space for, what you said, a safe space. Because a lot of people are also faced with a lot of issues like, institutional racism on the labor market, in education, police violence, etc., etc. And I think one of our main missions is to kind of sustain what the former generation left behind for us, and leave something behind that the next generation can build upon. I believe there was one more question, but maybe I can do a suggestion to, because the last two were kind of the same. Maybe to do open it up for the public and then round it up. Are there any questions, suggestions, thoughts? I'll walk.
Hi, I'm Hamja Hassan. I'm one of the artists in Documenta. So a lot of the terms defined in your archives are subject to expansion and historical revision. I mean, just take the term Asia. Is Turkey Asia? If Turkey joins the EU, European Union, is it still Asia? Will you stop collecting it? Similarly, the word black. There's a point in British colonial history, Irish people would be classified as such. There's contemporary debates whether Somalis are such. These are all, so yeah, that's my general, and sometimes there are forces beyond art which define that, such as said, the European Union membership. And yeah, how does that change whether you start and stop collecting? And is it always good to start? I mean, all of you have the first word of your thing is this thing, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much for the question. I can start answering on behalf of AAA and then we can move the microphone around. For us, we definitely try not to define what Asia is, but maybe what we can say is that we are aiming to create a resource about materials, recent art of Asia. And again, you know, when I was saying that we keep learning from the artists, for us it's really interesting to think about the movement and the trajectory of the artists themselves. So one example that comes to my mind from our display on the first floor is the late performance artist Lee Wan, for instance. He was from Singapore. This is how he started his practice. He studied in UK, came back to Singapore, and started getting involved in different types of artist collectives. And after that, you know, over time, he would start creating performance art festivals, writing about performance, but these won't necessarily be only in Singapore. He would go to China, he would go to India, he would start connecting these different communities with each other. So this is basically how we try to think about how these communities could be related to each other, what they've been learning from each other, you know, rather than us as an organization or as a team, we saying that this is the borders of this region. We really want to think about how artists move, how ideas move across national borders and also across different regions as well. I mean, that was one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation with you know, Keleketla Library and the Black Archives as well. So nothing necessarily thinking about, when it comes to the program, when it comes to exchange of ideas, not think in these, let's say, categories that would be coming from regions, but really think about our values and the ways that we work. I'm sorry? Very good question. I'm Turkish myself. I mean, you know, some people, I mean, sometimes I identify as Middle Eastern, sometimes it's European, sometimes it's West Asian. Yeah, it's really about, you know, where you are looking at it from. I don't necessarily identify as, you know, one of these, let's say, identities, but again, similar to the artists that we work with, these are people who would be interested in making connections rather than fixating one identity or belonging to a very particular category.
Yeah, I think I can build on that as well in relation to the term black. The reason why we chose this term is also based on the archive. As I said, we saw the student collective ended up in the Association of Surinamese People and found out that there were hidden histories of black resistance, black radical resistance even. One of the examples is the story of Otto and Hermina Huiswoud, and we actually brought some archival material in our installation upstairs. And It's a story of two people. Otto was born in Suriname, Hermie in Guyana. They ended up in New York, and Otto became the only black co-founder of the Communist Party in the US in 1919. From that position, they traveled all around the world to Brussels, Paris, South Africa, Trinidad, Jamaica, and after the Second World War, they ended up in the Netherlands. Why I'm using this story as an example is because it shows that there's a very interesting history, a transnational history, in which people who define themselves as black joined together in a collective fight against different forms of oppression, racism, colonialism, and imperialism. Our current exhibition is called Facing Blackness, partly because of this question. Because we realize that blackness is a social construct. I have a background in anthropology, so I don't look at issues of race like these fixed categories that are, very strictly defined. It's something that is fluid. Blackness means something different in South Africa now than it used to be 30 years ago during apartheid. Apartheid is a Dutch word, by the way. Blackness means something different in the Netherlands than in Germany. So we try to look at the idea of blackness in that way as well, as something very dynamic, but in the historical context of, modern history. We still live in a society, in a situation where we still have to deal with this legacy of colonialism, imperialism, and racism. So yes, Irish people may have been seen for a short while as black, but what you saw in that same history is that they were evolved into whiteness, which is a social construct as well. And one of the things that we try to do as an archive is make our collection available to understand these complex issues of race and how we still have to deal with these structures of white supremacy, colonialism, racism. So we don't define it very strictly, but it's something that we try to, we try to contribute to knowledge about blackness. And upstairs in the installation, we added an extra chapter about this exhibition called Facing Blackness, because in the Dutch context, it's something we've also been involved with. Some of you may know, one of the most popular traditions is something called Saint Nicholas, Zwarte Piet, which is a tradition compared to Christmas. You can compare it to Christmas where Santa Claus comes with elves, but in the Netherlands he comes with Black Piets, which are, it's literally an invention, but in practice it's being played by white people who dress up in blackface. And you could say that it's a racial caricature of black people. And what we try to show with our archive is how this social construct of blackness, developed throughout time through scientific racism in the Netherlands, but also right here in Kassel, where there was literally a colony in which African people were brought here to study their skulls and bones to develop these racist theories. But we also show the history of resistance against it. So to summarize it, we don't see blackness as a very strictly defined thing. It's a social construct which has different meanings in different contexts and different times. But it's also a reality that people of African descent, people with melanated skin, are still faced with different forms of racism, exclusion, oppression, including here in Germany. So that's what we try to reflect in the Black Archives, and that's what we try to make visible through the stories that we tell, including in the installation here.
Okay. Hi, and thank you very much for sharing and to hear the archives and organizations going on in Hong Kong, Johannesburg, and Amsterdam. And we all understand that when we are creating this kind of particular source of any particular region for the world, the intellectual autonomy is critical, right? When we provide alternatives for readers, for researchers, for students, for colleagues and artists to learn from those resources. I'm not sure my question will be relevant to all, but it's certainly relevant to Hong Kong colleagues. We all know that AA is especially, there is a particular interest in mainland China, and you've got wonderful collections there. The recent happening in Hong Kong is concerning. My question is that in relation to the intellectual autonomy, do you foresee any challenge of, say, censorships on its way? And if it is, then what is your strategy to engage or to resolve or to mitigate the challenges? Thank you.
Okay, I will start. So for us, first of all, we do research, we create resources, and when we work with artists. But at the end of the day, we work as part of the civil society. So for us, it's very important that we are constantly in conversation with all the colleagues, all the friends working in the field. There might be challenges ahead of us. For us, there is no immediate, I would say, impact on the organization, on the resources that we have. But for us, the constant, the dialogue that we have with the local art scene, it's very important, because at the end of the day, we work in a creative field, and it's not only about Hong Kong, it's most of the countries, I think, including Germany as well. I mean, there are limitations and potentials about the things that we can say, and it's really about how we learn from each other and how to have the stamina to keep talking about these issues, because it's never black and white. All of these limitations and all of these potentials, they change on a daily basis. So in that sense, this type of conversations, and then the dialogue that we have with the local community in Hong Kong, this is where we basically want to prioritize for the moment and keep learning from each other. You know, what are the strategies that we can develop together just to create spaces for artistic freedom of expression, as you mentioned. Thank you for the question.
And I think what we care is how can we continue to do what we need to do, so that our mission is to ensure there is enriched, generous art history from the region. So, but at the same time, this is a new time, that new situation we are learning to deal with. But primarily, every time when we come across different cases, we need to see how can we protect the artists that we are archiving, but at the same time, how can we continue the work that we are doing? So that means we need to really carefully think about what are we collecting. That also means by a certain time, we may not make certain things available publicly, but by consultation, etc., we may, by case to case, to let certain, let's say there's a researchers, we let them see certain materials. So there are different level of access, but I have to say, most of the time, most of the material are really open to all. But at the same time, more important is we discuss with the artists. Whenever we collect a archive project, we always talk to the artists. So as you know, there could be sensitive material not only in China, any part of the world. So if that, especially those letters are very personal, for example. So the artist may say that, oh, you only disclose this after I pass away. So every different archival material have different kind of consents and agreement that our researchers really deal with case by case with different contributor, basically. So I think two aspects, but more importantly, to really respect the preference of the donors. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask, and it's a very open question actually, so to whomever wants to kind of go into that. Of course, you've been invited, into a documenta 15, into sort of a lumbung structure with many other, many other, let's say, collectives of different shapes and forms and from all over the world. Are there certain, having been a part of it now for a certain time, and now it's starting in like a different way, I guess, are there certain strategies, sort of methodologies of things that you have seen and kind of learned from sort of other groups that are interesting to you? And I don't know, I know this is a big one, but I don't know, I was just sort of curious how that's been actually.
I think good school. Because of the way they understand collective practice. It reminds me a lot of Brazil, Fora do Exio, if I'm not mistaken, the collective that I met in Brazil. And I was talking to also Geisha about it. You know, when you work with a large collective to get to a central point, that means you have to connect people's hearts. You have to have a central focus that you depart from. And they use a lot of humor and karaoke within that process. We couldn't survive with a collective in Johannesburg, for example. There's not a lot of them. If they are, they always like reduce themselves to 1 or 2 people or 3. So what we've learned for Keleketla is the idea of good school and how they function and practice and run group as a whole. But then also the methodologies that they created through gaming of answering all this sort of collective understanding. But then the biggest one for me, and this is the question I've learned in Brazil, is like, how do you connect people's hearts to function in one unity? And then to rhythm, you know, the rhythm must beat in the same way. So we function and we march forward. We drill like soldiers moving forward. So what I've learned a lot is from this collective. It really opened and exploded my mind. But it's not something that we can import back home, that's for sure. It's something that we can keep in the mind and then study and see how we also, as we go forward as Keleketla, as an institution, we inspire. Ra teaches in the fine arts at Fridskul of Arts. And then in his practice, also in his teaching, some of his curriculum is to teach the students to form a collective. Not immediately go from school to a gallery, for example, and then it's always, from a collective you find they always take like individual people outside of that. It's like the same conversation that I can take in history when 156 trialists who were arrested for drafting the Freedom Charter, Mandela is the only one that is famous. So the idea of this individual explosion is not for us. So we always hide in the background and this institution runs forward. And it's something once we have a solid infrastructure that is with scale like this, that's where we can start teaching the future collective idea of what we've learned, of course, but what we want to see in the future.
Let's try again with this mic. I think for us it's been a very inspiring process as well. On behalf of our collective, Jessica, who's there making pictures, was actually the one who participated most in the meetings. And via her, I also participated in a few meetings, but we did learn a lot. And I think one of the largest lessons that we take away until now, because it kind of just begun, is the process of lumbung. Because I think, and it's also very personal reflection, in the Dutch context, you know, we're kind of always working, you know, always focused on the next project, on the next activity, on the next thing. And within our collective, you know, people have been faced with burnouts and exhaustion because we're constantly in this rat race, not just because of project, but also because we care for our community. You know, we try to help, try to support people. We've also been faced with extreme right attacks, racist attacks. So it's been a lot over the past years. And this process really allowed us to slow down a bit, reflect a bit, think about different ways of organizing, a different methodology, you know, the lumbung. Instead of always having short meetings, we have to have a goal and it has to be efficient, you know, very European and capitalistic, you know. It's more space and, you know, we can think differently about time and coming together. And, you know, they gave us trust and space. And I think we ended up creating something beautifully together with all of the other collectives. And in that context, when we relate it to art, I think the art also becomes more meaningful. And what one of you said earlier, that art is often, or artists are seen as these individual geniuses with, gifted talents, unrelated to a community. This allowed us to think about the art in relation to the context in which they live, the collection that we have, which gives both our collection, the archive, and the art, I think, more meaning. So I think that is those are a few of the reflections until now, because I think we still have like 98 days or something.
For us, maybe I personally feel, maybe we also share in Asia Art Archive, I think we really feel that the process of working in documenta is, thanks to Ramgupa's invitation, they really put us in an exercise of a huge collaboration exercise in a very intensive way. So, but it's almost like a dynamic, in Hong Kong, everything is so fast, we are very good at productivity, efficiency, etc. But thinking about collectivity is almost the opposite. It takes time to hand out, the time that Fridskul and Ramgupa hand out is like it takes 10 meetings, for example. But at the same time, you also have the urgency of deadline with all this exhibition, booklet, etc. So how can these two worlds work together? That is how we work in the past 6 months, basically. But at the same time, without this short exercise period, you can't really experience it in such an extreme way. But to me, I think the key thing I learned is really the importance of shared values. I feel Ramgupa's put so much effort in putting the artists together, the collective together. So although we are from very different regions, like 11 collective within this building, but we all share very, very similar values in terms of education, generosity, knowledge sharing, etc., which makes life easier. So although there are a lot of meetings, we have different pace, we have different style, but at the end, if we know that our core vision is similar, so it just connects us much easier and very easy. So I think the key thing I learned is the importance of shared values, at the same time the importance of making friendship, but it takes time. But now we go for extreme, that how can you make friends in a very quick way, but at the same time have a production deadline? That is something I keep asking Fridskul, how come you can hand out, but at the same time have production deadline? They said, oh, the timeline is always our friends. So yeah, you need to make friends together with a timeline, perhaps.
Good evening. Thank you so much for your inspiring talks and also sharing your experiences, frustrations, but also your victories, because there are a lot of victories and we need to celebrate that. And this leads actually to my questions. The collectives, particularly those who focus on building archives, these are alternative and independent spaces for experimentation, things that you cannot really do either in institutions or academic institutions. Hence, you develop an empirical knowledge. And also, my question, I have two questions. I don't want to divide collectives in the West and in, let's say, the global South, because in the West, unless you come from a privileged background and you have access to elite school where you have access to knowledge, then you sort of sorted. But if you come from, let's say, impoverished background, and you don't have access to the libraries. People say that culture is for rich people. Collectives, actually, they do a very interesting and important job, like on the ground. They provide alternatives. In, let's say, the global South, the government, for whatever reason, they decided, unless in the 60s or 70s, where maybe out of political agendas, they sponsored culture, like they sponsor sport. And yet at the moment, they stopped doing that. And collective, they're doing a very important job. And whether we like it or not, members of collective, they've acquired knowledge, they've developed an expertise. I'm asking a question: have you guys, whether in the West or in the global South, been approached by government as, let's say, cultural consultant? Is it realistic actually to think of collectives as cultural consultant? And from the moment you are put in that position, how do you maintain the cohesion? Because somehow, there are all sorts of temptations, and also, well, people talking about collective having to evolve, develop. Once you have those realities, those realms, how do you get to the next stage? Because obviously with those consultancy, all these possibilities, well, we've seen that in the past. It's also, how can I say that? It can create tensions, and also in terms of integrity.
Thank you for that question, or set of questions, related questions. Very important indeed, and for us, it has been a constant tension. In 2014, we put together a text called Bigger Than the Tick Box, because we wanted to engage the difficulty in explaining or defining the type of entity we are to either, and especially to government funding agencies, but also as well as possible partnering agencies. So in a way, in that text, we're really, thinking out loud about this precarious space that in our, what you refer to Global South, in South Africa, we have a situation where the government is really negligent of cultural work and cultural production. And then on the other hand, you have these European funding agencies, the Goethe Institute, the British Council, coming in to fill in the gaps, but also, of course, pushing agendas and defining the terms. And so the question you're asking about government is interesting, because the situation as it is already one where actually artists, cultural workers have to consider these tick boxes, deny and subvert them at their own risk. A lot of people these days speak about refusal, and we understand that refusal is risky, right? It comes at a risk, any kind of refusal for any kind of subjects. So we have always wanted to, and we actually want to work with governments. We believe that it is our duty to keep our governments accountable. We want to work with them because basically we don't have time as a country, as a continent even. Festivals like First Dark, etc., have informed white papers and cultural policies in countries like South Africa when independence came, but those ideals have been forgotten. The situation is dire, so indeed we need to enter those spaces because they are our spaces. The question of the tensions, the complexities, the compromises that happens once you are there are difficult ones and are not answerable, flippantly, and also they are not to be taken lightly. So it's about strategic partnerships that must be realized. So, just the project that we are doing with the drill hall, we are actually really thinking strategically about who are the key figures within at least the Johannesburg municipality office, but we also know that actually it links to the broader government. But what is funny is this, all these allies that we are beginning to build, who are helping us to resolve this problem with this building, keep on pushing us to go to the Ministry of Arts, Sports and Culture. And it's one area that we are actually less interested or a bit worried about their reputation and their total neglect. And yet that's the space that we keep being pushed onto. We think that it is important to think about other government departments beyond the arts in resolving some of the problems that we have in our country. We really believe it's important to push for a bridging of various policies, because we also think that certain ministries don't make sense to exist. For example, our arts and culture ministry has been combined with sports. Like, that doesn't make sense, right? And then Malusi like to speak about how in Ghana, the cultural ministry is working a lot with the tourism ministry. And we can learn from that as to what does such a thing achieve. So those are the thoughts around working with governments and the compromises. I don't know if Malusi, you want to add?
In our context, very good questions. Thank you. We operate in a different context, obviously. And as I said before, it's hard to put a label on us. We're an archive, but we're also active in activism, political advocacy, and education. So we're always very hesitant in participating in governmental projects, because we think it's it's imperative to remain as autonomous as possible in relation to, the mission and vision and the values that we have. At the same time, it's, I wouldn't say impossible, but it is hard to be completely independent from governmental institutions or government-related institutions in the Dutch context. To give a very clear example, currently we are partly funded, only since 2021. We had the Amsterdam Art Fund, the 4-year grant. And before that, we did everything on a voluntary basis or based on project funding. And then comes back to what we just discussed. What we learned from Lumbung is to slow down a bit again, not join the rat race. But we've kind of been trained and internalized to continuously be active, because we literally had to hustle to, survive. Project after project after project to get the funding to, pay the rent and sustain yourself. So for us, it's a constant delicate battle and tension between remaining as autonomous as possible whilst developing a practice and strategy in which you remain true to your values and vision. And one interesting thing I could say is that in the Dutch context, I do see a little shift in the public debate and the cultural sector. 10 years ago, there was almost no attention being given to issues of colonial history and its legacy in general and in the cultural field, but also in the political field. But I think because of grassroots activism, in which we also participated, the activism against Black Pete, and with that institutional racism, anti-Black racism, you saw that it became a higher prioritized political agenda point. For example, last year, the mayor of Amsterdam, the mayor of Rotterdam, and the mayor of Utrecht apologized formally for their role in the transatlantic slave trade. the Rijksmuseum, so the biggest historical museum in the Netherlands, found somewhere in the 1880s, developed the exhibition about slavery. 10 years ago, that was unthinkable. And now you see this interesting shift where almost all of these white institutions are dealing with, issues of race and colonialism, and Black Lives Matter was like a big hype to them. And often we are asked to participate in, as, what's the Dutch word, klankbordgroep, as advisors, as consultants. But we are very hesitant because often, there's a risk that you become tokenized. We talked to the Black Archives, so we're good. We gave them a few €100, so we're good. So our strategy, one of our priorities is to become and remain autonomous by sustaining the building and by developing a strategy in which we don't depend too much on government funding, whilst at the same time we also realize that all of us pay taxes, so we also have a right to determine or influence the cultural, political agenda. So, as you said, there's no formula. It's a very complicated and delicate issue, and you have to deal with them strategically. And, we do the best that we can.
I try to answer this in these perspectives. So we still get government funding, but when we, let's say 20 years ago, 100% of our operation cost is from the Hong Kong government. Now, only 10% is from Hong Kong government. So the reason is that we still get an increased amount, but AA just keep expanding and the funding just can't catch up. But every year when we go for these meetings with the government, like the Art Development Council who sponsor us, we're really grateful. But at the same time, oh, you're so able to raise money, you don't need us. But every year we really spend time to make them know that we need them to be part of the game. So I think it's important to, of course, not every project that AA do would align with Hong Kong government's interests, but there's some project that we do align. So for example, a few archival projects around Hong Kong art history, we not only work with certain government funding organization, we also work with Hong Kong Museum of Art. So how can we bring Hong Kong communities, different government institutions together to play together? So just now we talk about collectivity and friendship is find the similar values. So I think there is time that when there's certain project, we find there's similar values, then that's the time that we can collaborate. So I think how can we keep them in the game so that we can be friends, but everyone is different, right? There is time that we don't play together in this game, but there is another time that we can play together in other games. So I think keeping this friendship is equally important as different players is equally important, no matter for the funding, but the whole cultural system and ecology. Yeah. That's
I think we have time for one more question. If there are any participants who would like to make a remark or ask a question, or as Christian was saying in the previous session, we're going to be here for 100 days, -2, so we will be around as well. Exactly, the rest of our lives. And maybe just a reminder, Nur was speaking about this earlier. Only for June, there are around 280 events. This is just something that I would like to remind on behalf of our group. All the collectives that have been involved in Documenta 15, we are all very much interested and dedicated to create this type of platforms. So it's not only just to introduce our work, just to introduce our urgencies, but we really want to bring different types of groups together. So this is the reason why we are partially responsible in this number of events that will be happening here and the other venues in the coming weeks and months. So we really encourage you and welcome you to just join us so that we can continue the conversation in these different activities and different events as well. So I'll like to take the opportunity on behalf of everyone sitting here, to thank to all of you for being here, taking your time on a Sunday and being with us, and hope to continue our conversation soon.